All right, good afternoon, everyone. This is Dawn Brantley. I am the Massachusetts Emergency Management Agency Director and lead of NEMA's World Cup 2026 Task Force. Thank you all for joining today's informational webinar on the 2026 FIFA World Cup. This session is an important opportunity to ensure that we all have a baseline understanding of the foundational elements of this massive series of events and the public safety considerations involved. The 2026 World Cup presents unique and complex challenges for emergency management professionals at every level. With large-scale international travel, high-profile venues, and the need for seamless coordination across local, state, federal, and private sector partners, our preparedness efforts are critical to ensuring a safe and successful event. Past World Cup events have dealt with fireworks in the stadium, fan fest attendance exceeding 75,000 people, fan walks of thousands of fans, many of them ultras, 140 official venues, and countless unofficial venues, and they have required tens of thousands of law enforcement officers. That's why this webinar is so important. We're here to provide you with an overview of the events, discuss the key concerns that emergency management must address, and highlight how collaboration across jurisdictions will be essential in our planning and response efforts. We'll also share insights into the upcoming NEMA Mid-Year Forum panel, where we will take a deeper dive into these topics with experts from across the field. It is important to note that we are not speaking on behalf of FIFA. We are sharing what we know from information provided by FIFA, FEMA, and others. If you have questions as we go through the presentation, please put them in the chat and we will try and get answers from FIFA or the appropriate agency, but I can offer no guarantees that we'll be able to get those answers. I'd like to introduce our first and primary presenter, Sarah Zalikas. Sarah is the Special Events and Asher Program Coordinator for the Massachusetts Emergency Management Agency. Sarah has a decade of emergency management planning experience and has led Massachusetts Boston Marathon planning efforts for almost as long. Sarah is currently leading the state's preparedness for the 2025 Boston Marathon, the 250th anniversary of the Battles of Concord and Lexington, and the 2026 World Cup. After Sarah, we'll turn the presentation over to Angela Koppel, Program Director for the Emergency Management Assistance Compact, or EMAC, and Jackie Hamill, Operations Unit Manager for MEMA, to talk about resource coordination for World Cup. Massachusetts, by which we mean Jackie, will serve as the national coordinating state for EMAC during the World Cup. With that, Sarah, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Director Brantley. I'm so thrilled to be part of this task force, so thank you again. Just if you wouldn't mind advancing the slide. So the FIFA World Cup is the largest and most prestigious sport event globally. It has been hosted 22 times since 1930. The event, held every 4 years, captivates billions of people and showcases national pride, soccer talent, culture, history, and a passion for the game. The 2026 FIFA World Cup is one of the most highly anticipated global events, and for the first time ever, it will be hosted by 3 countries: Canada, my home country, the United States, and Mexico. Next slide, please. If you thought that the NFL Super Bowl was a big event in terms of viewership, it pales in comparison to the FIFA World Cup. The FIFA World Cup is the single biggest sporting event in the world. To give you an example, approximately 5 billion people engaged in the tournament in Qatar in 2022, following the content across various media platforms and devices. There were 1.5 billion total viewers for the 2022 FIFA World Cup final match in Qatar. Next slide, please. In March 2018, the United bid secured the 2026 FIFA World Cup. As mentioned, this will be the first time a World Cup will be hosted by 3 different countries, but it won't be the last, as Morocco, Spain, and Portugal will follow suit next time in 2030. Also, this is not the first time the FIFA World Cup has been held in the US. It was hosted back in 1994. Regarding this tournament, FIFA has increased the number of matches to 104, which is up from 96, and the number of teams. There will be 48 teams. That's 16 more than competed the last time in the 2022 World Cup. Next slide, please. 16 host cities across 3 countries have been awarded to host the 26th World Cup tournament. The host cities have been divided into 3 regions by FIFA. You can see here on the map the Western region, Central, and Eastern region. You can also see on the map the total number of matches played or that will be played in the host city over the 39-day tournament. Next slide, please. Each host city committee leads the strategic planning and execution of the scheduled matches of the FIFA World Cup awarded to their respective city, including coordinating official celebratory events taking place over a 39-day period surrounding the tournament. Concerning planning, the host city committees aim to create and deliver memorable and safe experiences that promote their region. They also partner with FIFA and associated sports and municipal entities. And they also partner with local, state, and federal public safety agencies, key partners in developing the host city safety and security plan. Next slide, please. Some of the key constituent groups in terms of planning that you should be aware of are the teams and the officials for those teams, the fans who will be coming from all over the world, and those include ticketed and non-ticketed fans, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit later in this presentation. Our VIPs, VVIPs from FIFA and their staff, as well as international and domestic dignitaries, your residents, media, to include international media and the rest of the world. It's important to note that as we go forward, in terms of managing the safety and security and the response to any threats to this tournament, all eyes will be on us. Next slide, please. Qualifying matches for the tournament continue. Obviously, the 3 host countries, US, Canada, and Mexico, are automatically qualified. The rest of FIFA member countries are battling it out right now for the other 45 places in the tournament. Also, something key to note is that FIFA recently made what some would say was a bold and controversial decision to ban 3 nations from participating in this tournament. Russia, due to the war in the Ukraine, Congo, and Pakistan, but I haven't read up on the reason for banning these countries or other nations. Next slide, please. The tournament officially starts in June 2026 and runs through July 19th. The opening match will be in Mexico City. If you haven't had an opportunity yet, I highly recommend you log on to FIFA's website. There you can view the full match schedule along with the matches scheduled for each of the host cities. Regarding ticket sales, FIFA is expected to release ticket details sometime this year, likely after the 2025 Club World Cup that kicks off in June, with priority access to FIFA members. So there's been some information out there about ticket sales, but from what we understand, there's sort of been scams going on and things like that, but official ticket sales still yet to come. Next slide, please. In July 2024, the Department of Homeland Security released a memo to all host cities regarding the special event assessment rating for the event. The FIFA World Cup matches have been designated as Tier 2 events from the start of the tournament through the quarterfinal matches. The 2 semifinal matches, the bronze final, which is a 3rd place match, and the final will be Tier 1 events, and they apply to Atlanta, Dallas, Miami, and New York, New Jersey. In consultation with our federal coordinator here in Massachusetts, we understand that the SEER designation only applies to stadium matches. I also just read in the news yesterday that the 2026 World Cup final game at MetLife Stadium, which is the New York, New Jersey stadium for the tournament, will break with tradition and we'll have a Super Bowl style halftime show. A list of artists will perform, however, they haven't been officially announced. So a lot of extra planning for our partners in New York, New Jersey. Next slide, please. As you know, the World Cup is expected to be a widely attended and high-profile special event, requiring significant coordination among federal, state, and local authorities. In general, for large special events designated as a Tier 1 or 2, a federal coordinator is appointed by DHS. The federal coordinator serves as DHS's Secretary's representative locally and is the primary, although not all exclusive, federal point of contact for facilitating coordinated federal planning and support for designated special events. The federal coordinator may be supported by the appointment of a deputy and an alternate federal coordinator, thus comprising the federal coordination team. Based on a memo released by DHS several months ago, we understand that each host city has been assigned a federal coordinator and a federal coordination team. Although there may be various levels of federal involvement, most special events, to include this event, are under the jurisdiction of state and local government. The appointed federal coordinator will be responsible for facilitating coordination of federal support with federal, state, and local government officials and private event planners. Next slide, please. In addition to the matches at the host city stadiums, there are many competition venues to consider and plan for. These facilities may be outside of your stadium's jurisdiction, and they include the venue-specific training sites, team base camps, and hotels. Next slide, please. Used by the 48 national squads to stay and train before and during the World Cup tournament, these team-based camps are basically their home away from home. These hubs will serve as the primary base for teams during the group stage, where they will train, rest, and prepare for their matches. In November 2024, FIFA unveiled the second edition of their online team-based camp brochure, providing an updated list of potential training sites and accommodation for the FIFA World Cup teams. 26 new options have been added, bringing the total to 49 potential team-based camps. This list of sites is available online. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend you check it out. Over the next few months, the list of those potential team-based camps will grow, with further options across Canada, Mexico, and the United States. Two important notes on this. Some of these potential team-based campsites are in non-host cities, and teams will submit their final selection following the final draw for the 2026 World Cup. So it may be closer to a year before we know these final locations. In terms of the venue-specific training sites, each of the 16 host cities participating must provide these specialized training venues. These sites will serve as essential facilities for participating teams to train ahead of the matches. If you haven't had an opportunity to read the 2018 United Bid Book, I highly recommend you do. It's quite lengthy, but it gives you an idea of all the sites that were bid on back in 2018. And for each host city, there's been upwards of 4 venue-specific training sites bidded on. That doesn't mean necessarily that those will be the sites in the end, but it gives you a good idea of where they may land. And finally, just a couple of other things on the venue-specific training sites. Competition quality training sites will be paired with a nearby hotel. And match day -1, those training sessions will be open to the media. Next slide, please. And here's just a map of those potential team-based camp sites as of November 2024. Again, the list of all of these sites and the details on those sites are available online. You can see that many of the sites are, again, non-host city sites. Next slide, please. As mentioned, FEMA is accepting expressions of interest from other potential team-based camp sites around the country, again, to include those non-host cities. In later this year, FIFA will have its final draw. The final draw will reveal geographic locations in which these teams will play group stage matches. And at that point, the teams will submit selection preferences for those team-based locations. So again, it's probably going to be about a year out before we know more information on that. And they're looking at the window, I believe, between January 26th and March 26th to nail down those locations. Next slide, please. For planning purposes, host cities will also be focusing on those hotels that will host the teams, as well as the FIFA officials, staff, and VIPs. Last month, FIFA projected those hotel allocations. We understand to date that the host cities know about these hotel locations or potential locations. However, not all hotels are under contract. Next slide, please. The final draw is anticipated to be staged in December 2025. All 48 qualified teams will be announced. Again, if you visit FIFA's website for this tournament, you can follow along and track the teams for the different FIFA confederations regarding their status in terms of qualifying. Next slide, please. The next two slides are dedicated to team and referee movement during the tournament. One important thing to note is that popular teams such as Brazil may arrive in the US earlier to play unrelated matches or match to showcase their team. This may be a last-minute decision in terms of scheduling and something that your jurisdiction will need to be aware of and plan for. Regarding team movement, teams might arrive in the US 2 to 3 weeks before the tournament for preparation. They move to the team base camp no later than 5 days before the first match. They fly to the match venue, typically match day -2 or match day -1, and they do so typically on a chartered flight. They stay in venue-specific team hotels. Potentially, they train match day -1 at the venue-specific training site, and also most teams will visit the stadium at this point. On match day, they'll arrive at the stadium approximately 2 hours before the match, and they'll leave the stadium approximately 90 minutes after the match and go back to their hotel or straight to the airport, especially if they've been knocked out of the tournament. Next slide, please. Referees and staff, which usually come in groups of 10 to 20 per host city, will arrive at the host city typically match day -2 or match day -1. They stay at a FIFA hotel, potentially train match day -1 at a venue-specific training site and visit the stadium. On match day, they generally will arrive 3 hours before the match, and they leave the stadium approximately 90 minutes after a match and go back to the hotel or straight to the airport. Next slide, please. So in addition to the matches, the FIFA World Cup has other event components that can literally touch any jurisdiction in your state. There's the FIFA Fan Fest, which I'll talk about in a little bit more detail, public viewing sites, and these can be licensed and non-licensed that can pop up, mobile activations for World Cup activities, fan experience sites, community activations, and art and cultural related activities. Next slide, please. FIFA Fan Festivals are public viewing events organized by FIFA and the host cities during the FIFA World Cup. They're anticipated to run contractually for the 39 days of the tournament. The daily operation time, however, is dependent on each host city. Admission to the Fan Fest is free, and Fan Fest is a wonderful experience for fans where they can watch televised matches, experience interactive activities, live music, community entertainment, and much more. FIFA Fan Fests have a primary location in each host city, but again, other Fan Fest type locations can spring up. The host city is responsible for the delivery of the FIFA Fan Fest with certain guidelines and recommendations from FIFA. That is actually something that I believe collectively the host cities are waiting on from FIFA, those guidelines in terms of the criteria for these sites and safety and security. They're also supported from the local organizing committee as well. The host cities also responsibilities, include the strategic planning and funding of the FIFA Fan Fest through the build-up right to on-site operations. So again, another really important decision. Apart from the matches at the stadium, the Fan Fest will probably be your secondary event in terms of large a large event within your host city. Next slide, please. So just to give you an example, here are a few of the fan fests that have taken place over the years. I believe the first official World Cup fan fest started back in 2006. This is just an example of the fan fest that happened over the past few years. So in 2014, the fan fest in Brazil and Rio de Janeiro saw over 900,000 attendees. In Moscow in 2008, the Fan Fest exceeded 1.8 million attendees, and then Doha and Qatar had exceeded 1.8 million at Al Bida Park in Doha. Some more information too about 2022 that I read in a very interesting white paper that was released shortly after the World Cup was that the FIFA Fan Fest in Al Bida Park was originally slotted to have a capacity of about 40,000, but it welcomed an average of 70,000 visitors a day. They really struggled to manage the crowds coming in. The festival was open every day from 4 p.m. to 2 a.m., and 146 local and international music artists performed at the main fan festival venue. I mentioned that white paper. I think we have it available through our NEMA task force folder. We're happy to share it, but it gives you some really great detail and insight into the security challenges, especially around the FanFest site in 2022. So we're absolutely happy to share that information with you. Also, just recently, FIFA has added some historical FanFest information on their website, and I highly recommend you take a look at it, especially the short video on the 2014 Brazil World Cup. It really shows you sort of soup to nuts how they build up the FanFest area and all the decisions and security that went into it. So it's a really interesting short video. Next slide, please. In terms of FIFA licensed viewing sites and parties, these events can be commercial or non-commercial, but commercial events require a license. One of the other guiding documents that we're waiting from FIFA is the public viewing guidelines to host committees. And these guidelines provide sites interested in hosting viewing parties contingent on the date that the FIFA guideline is issued. My understanding is in terms of some requests for information, some of the questions we have in Massachusetts, and I'm sure in many other host cities, is how many licenses will FIFA be issuing? What is the application window? This will, of course, be helpful information to understand what jurisdictions have applied and approved viewing license. So again, you have your FanFest sites, but you can also have several of these licensed and non-licensed public viewing sites. And that, again, is just another thing to consider in terms of your overall planning. Next slide, please. I'm going to pivot now to share a couple slides with regard to fans. In terms of the fan types that we can expect, because this is a global event, we're expecting international, domestic, and local fans. The average stay in a host city, and this is information that's been provided from FIFA historical data from Qatar and Russia, is that we can expect them to stay approximately 5 to 10 days. Fans traveling from distant regions may exceed their stay, typically 10 to 14 days before or post-tournament. Fans from neighboring countries to the host cities tend to stay about 2 to 5 days, and regional fans would typically come out to this event for a weekend trip. Next slide, please. So fans may come to the host city just to experience the World Cup and FIFA Fan Fest sites. And a lot of these fans have these amazing team fan supporters, and they may be international, domestic, and local fans. And team supporters may or may not have match tickets, but they're just so thrilled that their team is in the country, and to follow their team is really a big deal. So whether they have tickets or not doesn't much matter. Next slide, please. Here's a quick slide too, just to give you an estimated US travel profile for our fans. You can see that 54% we're expecting to be international visitors, included non-ticketed holders. The ages of these fans range 16 to 29, 32%, 30 to 49, we're looking at 40%, and 50 to 69, 22%. 41% of the fans of international fans, will be, visitors speak English. 63% of fans are male. Visitors owning a credit card or debit card, 68%, and the average international visit stay in the US, right on target with what we said earlier, which is about 9.7 days or 10 days. Next slide, please. In terms of fan travel, travel is heavily influenced by the final draw in December 2025, because obviously that's when we're going to find out who qualified for the tournament. Team supporters, they mainly focus on following a specific team. For example, Brazil, they'll travel all over the country just to see their team in action. FIFA will sell follow your team specific packages to sort of meet the demands of these types of team supporters. And fans will move from city to city to watch as many of their team matches until they're knocked out of the tournament. And then you have your stadium-based fans, and these are fans that are solely focused on just seeing the games from a specific stadium. And FIFA will also be selling specific packages for stadiums. So just two important things to note there. Next slide, please. In addition, some fans will try to see as many matches as possible during the tournament. They may focus on a geographical region or try to go to as many stadiums as they're able to. Each match and fan group will have a very different dynamic, and this is really important to understand. This is where relying on our World Cup subject matter experts and our intelligent community is critical. They're in tune with and follow sort of the behavioral trends of these fans. And many of these fans also practice fan marches. This is a picture in this slide that depicts Dutch supporters back in the Euro Cup 2024, where they had upwards of 80,000 fans marching before a match. So one of the things that we understand is some fan bases will organize these fan-based marches, which typically happen a few miles out of the stadium and take place over about an hour or two leading up to the game. So something else to consider and plan for. If any of you also attended the FIFA World Cup conference back in October, you heard from our World Cup subject matter experts on this. It was really fascinating information, and again, it can be really helpful in planning for this tournament. Next slide, please. So the last couple slides are really dedicated to public safety and security planning, which sort of tees up our panel session on March 24th. Next slide, please. I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide, which is the safety and security planning governance. But in a nutshell, FIFA's safety and security department for this tournament worked closely with the host city safety and security working groups to develop the 2026 FIFA World Cup safety and security concept. This document, which was finalized and released a few months ago to all of our host cities, is intended to guide and assist each of the 16 host cities in creating unique but consistent safety and security plans. It outlines 18 areas of planning focus, and those are meant to guide each host city's planning groups or teams. Next slide, please. This is the organization chart for the FIFA World Cup Safety and Security Team. At the tippity top of this chart, you have GB Jones, who's the Director of Safety and Security for FIFA, and will be part of our NEMA conference panel coming up in March, later this month. There are 3 regions in terms of their org chart, West, Central, and East, and each region has been appointed a regional director. Each regional director is responsible for separate project teams, which it's hard to see, but they're in the teal colored boxes there below. for each host city. They're also the planning touch point for each of the host city committees. And that includes any host city issues, requests for information concerning FIFA. For example, like I mentioned earlier, when is FIFA releasing, the public viewing site guide to our host city communities? So if you haven't met your regional director, I highly recommend to reach out to that person. Wealth of information and can certainly help in your planning efforts. Next slide, please. So this is just a slide that shows those 18 areas of focus for planning. Again, this information is detailed in that FIFA SEC document that I mentioned. And these areas are meant to guide the effort of host city planning groups or teams that will ultimately develop that host city safety and security plan. So most of our host cities have either developed specific planning groups, 18 in total, to cover all of these areas. Others, like us here in Massachusetts, we've taken sort of a hybrid model. We've used a model in terms of what we've done for other large special events like the Boston Marathon and our working groups, and sort of tweaked and folded in these lines of effort. We here in Massachusetts have a total of 14 that we're working with. Next slide, please. So the last few slides here before I turn it over to Jackie and Angela, just to outline and tease up the discussion for the March 24th conference. Next slide, please. As you know, the World Cup will bring millions of visitors and an unprecedented demand on public safety resources to host cities and surrounding jurisdictions. Some of the things that we talked about internally and collectively with our partners is, what are the impacts and what are the considerations for our emergency management professionals at the local, state, and federal level, especially our state level here. One is your planning mindset, right? Understanding that this is not your typical Super Bowl. This event will draw people from all over the world. It will serve as a platform for cultural exchange where fans not only support their team, but also share their customs, food, music, and art. So it'll be really important to be aware of those cultural nuances and plan for them. Just the sheer scope and duration of this event is something to consider. Many of you have been part of planning and operations for large special events, whether it's the Super Bowl, the Boston Marathon, Sail, you name it. We're used to, an event maybe taking place a day or two, but certainly not over a 39-day tournament period. And then finally, too, this is a situation where we have 11 host cities here in the United States versus, again, like just one location, like a Super Bowl stadium. And that's a big change for us when you think about planning. It's also a change for FIFA. Literally, again, the activities that are going to be going on for the 39 days and the bandwidth we need to manage this tournament is going to be quite extensive. The next one is establish a close partnership with your host city community or committees. I'm sure all of our host cities that are on today have definitely reached out and started planning with that host city committee very closely. Again, they're your main point of contact, your main touch point to FIFA, and any information FIFA related will trickle down to that host city committee. Also, in our experience here in Massachusetts, our host city committee members have tremendous amount of experience planning for large special events around the world, such as previous World Cups and the Olympics, and they bring a lot of expertise and experience to the table. The next one is integrated multi-agency, multi-jurisdiction coordination. As you know, the World Cup planning involves numerous public safety and security agencies working across all levels of government. So the question is, how best do you coordinate that effort and ensure that everyone who needs to be involved is involved? One way to think about that is applying a RACES model. Who's responsible, who should be accountable, who needs to be consulted, and who needs to be informed. Also, the importance of partnering with neighboring states. For example, here in Massachusetts, we recognize that our neighboring states, which are not host cities, will be impacted as our major cities are geographically so close. So, for example, the closest level 1 trauma hospital to Gillette or Boston Stadium is Providence, and it's not Boston. So we very quickly recognize that we need to pull in our partners from Rhode Island. Identifying your celebration corridor and your area of response. So again, I use that example of pulling in our partners from Rhode Island, understanding that our initial celebration corridor, once we sort of made that connection to the impacts south of us, that corridor expanded a decent amount. And so again, just really understanding what that corridor is for you. And understanding when and where all these events are taking place, especially when we start understanding more about these non-comp venues and these pop-up activities, whether they're licensed or non-licensed through FIFA. That's going to be really important, again, for that area of response. And then what jurisdictions will be impacted and who's going to require support. It's not noted on here, but also law enforcement and security, of course, are high priorities. Private companies don't have the capacity to help secure every event, so it's going to be an all hands on deck approach. Next slide, please. Having a public safety governance framework in place. This is something that we've modeled here in Massachusetts for other events. We've modeled it once again here for the World Cup. But the question is, for the partners on the call today, where does local, regional, and state EM fit in concerning your host city? So when you're thinking about your public safety governance model, it's really important to identify where you fit in the roles that you have. Intelligence informed risk-based planning and decision support, always very important. On the operations side, command control, coordination, and communication, C4. So having those conversations about what will your operational footprint look like for those 39 days? And what will the local, regional, and state EM operational roles be? And how will you coordinate with your host city stadium EOC and the other department operation centers and EOCs within your area of response? So those are all important questions, hopefully to be addressed in your C4 planning groups. In terms of public safety and security funding, there are no decisions made yet on whether the federal government will help to fund the wraparound services needed for safety surrounding the games. This impacts EMAC resources, as some states need to know their funder before releasing those resources. Also, the US government signed a guarantee letter stating it would ensure the safety and security of these events. While state directors can't enforce this, it may be informative for you and your congressional delegations. Then there's just the broad impacts of this event to include those non-host cities. With respect to those non-host cities, just understanding that the fans and maybe even the teams, etc., will potentially fly into your airports, stay in your hotels. You may have pop-up fan fests or large viewing parties. So as a non-host city, you need to be aware and prepared for this. Pre-event information sharing and broader stakeholder engagement is incredibly important. Again, this event will likely touch all corners of your state, and some information sharing with your public safety partners is key. So communicating with your local and regional EM partners, your community officials, and also for those jurisdictions within your state that don't have events or activities taking place, but may be called upon to provide mutual aid. So again, these are folks that need to be in the know. And then finally, just the bandwidth to pivot to any non-related disaster or emergency that may happen during the tournament. So again, this is really crucial as well. So with that said, I'm going to stop there. I'm going to turn it over to my co-presenters, Angela and Jackie, and then I'll wrap it up with a couple slides in a few minutes. So Angela and Jackie, it's all yours. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. So I'm sure you're all familiar with EMAC, the Emergency Management Assistance Compact, but just in case, we have a couple of highlights for you. Next slide, please. Jackie?
Thanks, Angela. So on the slide, as you see, the EMAC is law in all 50 states. The District of Columbia Puerto Rico, the U.S. Virgin Islands, and the Northern Mariana Islands. The U.S. Congress passed EMAC law as public law in 1996. EMAC is a nationally enacted state-to-state mutual aid compact that facilitates the sharing of resources, whether that be services, personnel, equipment, or commodities across state lines during times of emergency or disaster. Next slide. This slide breaks down what EMAC does and what EMAC does not do. I'm not going to read every bullet. I'm just going to point out a few of the higher level ones, but EMAC provides an efficient and scalable system for sharing resources between the member states. The 13 articles of EMAC address reimbursement, tort liability, and immunity, as well as license reciprocity. Resources that do deploy through EMAC are part of a coordinated response managed by the State Emergency Management Agency. EMAC is an all hazards, all disciplines, including the National Guard, and can be utilized for pre-planned events as well as disaster events. One of the things I do want to highlight that it doesn't do is we don't endorse self-employment. It does not replace any existing mutual aid agreements, because there are a lot of mutual aid agreements out there, especially for like the fire sector. It doesn't hoard, stockpile, prioritize, or allocate resources, and it does not replace the need for federal support. Next slide.
So a few tips for using EMAC for the World Cup. 1, identify resource needs early. This is a huge event. There's going to be a lot of needed resources. So the sooner you can identify what those are, the sooner you can identify who's going to be able to help you. 2, identify funding sources. So likely this is going to be state funding, as we're not aware of any federal funding at this point. Next, pre-plan with assisting states so they can identify the resources, who's available to assist. They can develop mission-ready packages. Next, accept offers early. Hold briefings to answer questions, review the security plan with deploying personnel, and make sure that everybody's on the same page. Then, prior to receiving resources through EMAC, the governor must declare. We have some examples from governors that declared for the purposes of implementing EMAC for a pre-planned event that we can give you if you need that. Finally, reimburse according to EMAC guidance. Next slide. So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to Jackie or myself. And that's it for us.
Just a couple more slides here. Thank you, Angela. Really important, because I know it applies to everybody on this webinar. The year 2026 marks the 250th anniversary of the United States, and it's going to promise to be a memorable year. Summer 2026 will be especially marked by significant events, most notably the World Cup, July 4th, and many other events. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to leave you with this and give you an example of our special events timeline for 2026 here in Massachusetts, as I'm sure so many of you can relate to this. In 2026, we're going into, I'm sure, many more activities and events associated with the 250th anniversary. We're already starting to tee this up with a huge event here in Massachusetts, the anniversary of the battles of Lexington and Concord this April. Annually, we host the Boston Marathon, which is always either a Tier 1 or Tier 2 event. We then kick off the World Cup starting June 13th. We have 7 matches here at Boston Stadium, which is actually Gillette Stadium, that run right through to July 9th. We, of course, have our huge July 4th celebration in Boston, and other fireworks displays and activities are sure to pop off all over our state. And then we wrap things up with Sail Boston starting July 11th. So again, we can certainly relate to a very busy 2026 in terms of large special events. I think the good news is that we're all in this together. If there's anything that I've learned over my many years of doing this work, it's to be supportive of all partners and transparent in terms of sharing information. When planning for large special events, it should always be one team, one mission. That's really all in terms of we had for our presentation today. On behalf of Director Brantley and my co-presenters, we thank you so much for the time that you've spent with us to join this webinar. We hope that you found it informative. We hope that many of you will be participating in the conference on March 24th. And of course, if you have those questions, please put them in the chat. We'll do our best to get the answers you need. And I leave you now with our contact information. And if Director Brantley's still on, I can turn it to her. But if not, Jess, I think that's all we have today. So thank you again, everyone.
Hey, Sarah, thank you. An excellent job, Sarah and Angela and Jackie. Thank you so much. My last pitch is we will be doing a panel on the World Cup at the NEMA Mid-Year Forum in March. It will include Sarah. It will include Director Morales from Philadelphia Office of Emergency Management, who will have some very complex multiple events celebrating the 250th at the same time as their World Cup. And it will also feature GB Jones, who is, as you know, running safety and security for FIFA. So it will be an excellent opportunity to hear these folks really dive deep on their preparedness efforts, challenges, and the work that they've done collaborating across many sectors and levels of government. So thank you for your time this afternoon. Sincerely appreciate it. This has been recorded and will be made available afterwards.